The news of Richard Ashford III's death spread through the coastal town of Havenport, Massachusetts, like a thick morning fog rolling in from the Atlantic. He was found in his study on a crisp October morning, slumped over his mahogany desk, an empty glass of scotch beside him and a fire still crackling softly in the hearth. For the residents of this quiet, wealthy enclave, the loss of the 68-year-old philanthropist was a shock, but not a surprise. Richard had been in declining health since a hip surgery 6 months prior, and a heart attack seemed, to the outside world, like a sad but logical conclusion to a life lived fully. However, for his 2 children, William and Sarah Ashford, the tragedy was immediately overshadowed by a far more pressing and infuriating complication: the woman who now stood in the shadows of their family mansion. Her name was Elena Moreau, and just 3 weeks before Richard's death, she had become his wife. To William and Sarah, she was not a grieving widow, she was an interloper, a fortune hunter who had somehow bewitched their vulnerable father in the final months of his life. As the family lawyers solemnly informed them of the funeral arrangements, the tension in the room was palpable, a silent war already declared between the heirs and the stranger who now called their childhood home her own. Elena Moreau presented herself as a picture of subdued grief. A woman of 42, with sharp cheekbones and tired, knowing eyes, she wore black with a quiet dignity that the Ashford children found utterly performative. She spoke with a soft French accent and kept to herself, wandering the vast gardens of the Ashford estate or staring out at the gray ocean from the Widow's Walk. To the local police, her story was simple and consistent. She was a private nurse, hired to aid Richard in his recovery. Their professional relationship had blossomed into something deeper, a genuine connection between 2 lonely souls. Richard, she claimed, was lucid, happy, and fully in command of his faculties when he proposed. The marriage was his idea, a final act of happiness before his health declined. William, a 35-year-old investment banker with his father's sharp jawline but none of his warmth, refused to believe a word of it. He demanded an autopsy, convinced that foul play was involved. His younger sister, Sarah, a gentle soul who taught art at a local college, was less confrontational but equally suspicious. She remembered her mother, a vibrant woman who had died of cancer a decade ago, and the thought of a stranger taking her place so quickly felt like a desecration of her memory. The autopsy was performed, and the official cause of death was confirmed: a myocardial infarction. A heart attack. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it would not stay buried for long. The reading of the will was the explosion everyone had been waiting for. Gathered in the wood-paneled office of Harrison and Associates, the family's legal counsel for 3 generations, William and Sarah listened in stunned silence as the document was read aloud. Richard Ashford III, in his final testament, had left the vast majority of his estate to his new wife, Elena Moreau. She would inherit the waterfront mansion, the summer home in the Hamptons, the portfolio of stocks and bonds, and the 42-foot sailing yacht docked in the harbor. The total value was estimated at just over $8 million. To William and Sarah, his flesh and blood, he left a modest trust fund of $500,000 each, a sum that would barely cover William's annual bonus. William slammed his fist on the mahogany table, his face a mask of crimson rage, while Sarah sat frozen, tears welling in her eyes. Elena, seated across from them, simply looked down at her hands, offering no defense, no gloating, no words at all. It was this silence, this absence of explanation, that infuriated William the most. That very afternoon, he made a series of phone calls. He would not let this stand. He would not let this woman, this stranger, steal his birthright. He needed proof. He needed someone who could dig into the past of Elena Moreau and find the dirt he knew had to be there. He needed a professional. Nina Vance was not the kind of private investigator who spent her days following cheating spouses through hotel lobbies. A former forensic accountant for the FBI, she had built a reputation in Boston for untangling the most complex financial crimes and fraud cases. Her specialty was finding the lies that people hid in spreadsheets, in property records, in the paper trail of a life. When William Ashford walked into her modest office overlooking the Boston Common, she listened to his story with a practiced, neutral expression. She heard the anger, the sense of entitlement, but she also heard the genuine fear in his voice. He was afraid of losing his legacy. Nina agreed to take the case, but she warned him, she dealt in facts, not feelings. If Elena Moreau was legitimately in love with his father, she would find that out. And if she was a con artist, she would find that out too. William agreed to her terms, writing a sizable retainer check without hesitation. Nina's first step was simple, a background check. She ran Elena's social security number, her immigration documents, her professional licenses. To her initial surprise, everything came back clean. Elena Moreau was a French citizen who had immigrated legally 6 years ago. She had a nursing degree from a reputable school in Lyon and an unblemished employment record in the United States. On paper, she was exactly who she claimed to be. But Nina had learned that the cleanest papers often hid the dirtiest secrets. She decided to dig deeper, starting with the one thing that always told the truth, the past. Nina began her investigation by looking for the gaps, the empty spaces in a person's timeline. With Elena, the gap was glaring. There was virtually no digital footprint of Elena Moreau before the age of 36. No social media accounts from her youth, no mention in French local newspapers, no yearbook photos from high school, no records of family. It was as if she had simply materialized in Lyon at the age of 26, attended nursing school, and then vanished again until reappearing in the United States. This was a red flag Nina had seen before, a classic sign of identity appropriation. She contacted a trusted associate in Europe, a former Interpol analyst named Jean-Luc Dubois, and asked him to physically visit Lyon. Specifically, she wanted him to find the nursing school records and, more importantly, to visit the address listed on Elena's old French ID. What Jean-Luc found in France was the first crack in the facade. The nursing school confirmed Elena attended and graduated, but when Jean-Luc showed them a recent photo of the woman, the administrator hesitated. The face was right, but the demeanor, the eyes, something was off. They had no reason to doubt it was her, but the seed of doubt was there. Then Jean-Luc visited the old address, a small apartment in a working-class district. The current tenant had never heard of Elena Moreau. The trail in France was cold, but it led Jean-Luc to a new destination, a small town in the Swiss Alps, mentioned in an old student record as Elena's place of birth. The town was called Montreuil, a picturesque but isolated community hugging the side of a mountain. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and secrets, if they existed, were buried deep. Jean-Luc arrived on a gray Tuesday morning and went straight to the town hall to request birth records for Elena Moreau. The clerk, an elderly woman with spectacles perched on her nose, searched the digital database and then the physical archives. She returned with a confused expression. There was no record of an Elena Moreau ever being born in Montreuil. There was, however, an old newspaper archive in the basement. Jean-Luc spent hours scrolling through microfiche, looking for anything that might connect the name to the town. His persistence paid off in a dusty corner of the year 2002. He found an obituary, yellowed with age, for a young woman named Elena Moreau. According to the article, Elena had died at the age of 20 in a tragic car accident on a winding mountain road. There was a grainy photo accompanying the text. Jean-Luc held his breath and compared the image to the photo of the current Elena he had on his phone. The resemblance was uncanny. The same cheekbones, the same shape of the eyes. But it couldn't be the same person. This woman had been dead for over 20 years. He immediately called Nina. The woman living in the Ashford mansion was not Elena Moreau. She was someone wearing Elena Moreau's name. Nina flew to Switzerland herself, leaving the gray of Boston for the snow-capped peaks of the Alps. She met Jean-Luc in Montreux, and together they began to unravel the mystery of the dead woman and the living imposter. They located the family of the real Elena Moreau, an elderly couple still living in the town, still grieving their daughter lost so many years ago. They showed them the photo of the current Elena, the one married to Richard Ashford. The mother's hands trembled as she held the picture. She confirmed that the woman in the photo was not her daughter. But then she pointed at the eyes, the shape of the face, and whispered a name that sent a chill down Nina's spine: Katia. She recognized the look, the specific bone structure, because she had seen it before in news reports decades ago. It was the face of the girl who had been her daughter's best friend, a troubled Croatian refugee named Katia who had come to Switzerland as a child and then vanished from their lives shortly before the accident. The old woman explained that her daughter had died alone in that car, but she had always wondered about Katia, the girl who had no family, no past, and who seemed so desperate to disappear. Nina now had a name, a real name, and a country of origin. She thanked the family and immediately began searching international records for a Croatian national named Katia, born in the early 1980s. What she found next opened a door to a past far darker than simple identity theft. The trail led Nina to Croatia, to the coastal city of Split, and into the chaotic archives of a nation still healing from the wars of the 1990s. With the help of a local historian and a lot of patience, she pieced together the tragic childhood of the woman now calling herself Elena. She was born Katia Novak in 1980, in a small village that was caught in the crossfire of the Croatian War of Independence. Her father, Dražen Novak, was not a soldier, but something far more dangerous for a child, a black market arms dealer who supplied weapons to various factions, playing both sides for profit. When the war ended, Dražen had made powerful enemies. In 1992, he disappeared, taking a substantial amount of money that belonged to a criminal network with ties across the Balkans. He left his 12-year-old daughter in an orphanage in Split, using forged documents to hide her true identity, telling her to never use their real name. Katia spent years in the system, a ghost child with a target on her back. At 19, she escaped the orphanage and fled Croatia, eventually making her way to Switzerland, where she befriended a girl named Elena. When Elena died in that car accident, Katia saw her only chance at survival. She took her friend's identity, creating a new life from the ashes of the old, hoping the men hunting for Dražen Novak's daughter would never find her. Armed with this devastating information, Nina returned to the United States and requested a formal meeting with Elena at the Ashford mansion. It was a tense, cold afternoon. The autumn wind rattled the windows as the two women sat across from each other in the vast living room, the portrait of Richard Ashford III staring down at them from above the fireplace. Nina laid out her findings calmly and methodically: the false identity, the dead friend in Switzerland, the Croatian orphanage, the father who was a fugitive arms dealer. She watched Elena's face carefully, looking for a crack, a flinch, a sign of guilt. Instead, what she saw was a profound and weary sadness. Elena did not deny it. She confirmed everything, her voice low and steady. She explained that she had met Richard Ashford as his nurse, and for the first time in her life, she had felt safe. She had told him everything, her entire story, terrified he would turn her in. But Richard, the philanthropist, the man who had spent his life trying to help others, did not recoil. He held her hand and told her that everyone deserved a second chance. He used his wealth and his connections to legally solidify her identity as Elena Moreau, not to hide a criminal, but to protect a woman who had been a victim her entire life. She swore that their love was real and that his death was natural, a broken heart and a body that had simply given out. Nina found herself in a professional and moral quandary. Elena's story was heartbreaking, and her confession had the ring of truth. She had not stolen Richard's money. Richard had willingly given it to her, knowing exactly who she was. Nina reported her findings to William and Sarah, explaining that while Elena had committed the crime of identity fraud decades ago, there was no evidence she had harmed their father or manipulated him financially. She was, legally speaking, his legitimate widow. William was furious. He refused to accept this narrative, accusing Nina of being fooled by a clever sociopath. He demanded that the police be notified about the identity fraud, hoping that a criminal charge would invalidate the marriage and the will. But before Nina could respond, a new piece of information emerged that changed everything. The private toxicology report that William had commissioned, the one done separately from the official autopsy, came back with an alarming finding. Richard Ashford's blood contained traces of a powerful and uncommon sedative, a drug called benzodiazepine XY, a substance that was not part of his regular heart medication and could easily induce a fatal cardiac event in a man with his condition. The death was no longer clearly natural. It was now a potential homicide. The news of the sedative sent shockwaves through the investigation. Nina was now dealing with a possible murder case. She re-interviewed everyone involved, starting with Elena. The widow seemed genuinely stunned by the revelation, her composure finally cracking to reveal raw fear. She denied ever administering such a drug, but she admitted that Richard had been forgetful with his medications in his final weeks, and that a caregiver had easy access to his pills. This statement, meant to defend her, only deepened the suspicion against her. Nina then turned her attention to the family. She interviewed the household staff, the family doctor, and the local pharmacist. It was the pharmacist who provided a small but crucial detail. A week before Richard's death, a prescription for a mild sedative had been called in for him. The prescription was for a standard drug, but the pharmacist remembered the call because the person on the phone had a slight accent, one he couldn't quite place. A French accent? A Croatian one? He wasn't sure. This placed Elena directly in the frame. But Nina was too experienced to stop there. She looked at the sons. William had access to his father's house, a motive of $8 million, and a cold, calculating demeanor. Sarah, the quiet artist, had seemed genuinely grief-stricken, but Nina knew that the quiet ones often hid the deepest secrets. The final piece of the puzzle came from an unlikely source, the late Richard Ashford's personal journal, which Nina found in a hidden drawer of his study desk. The last entry was dated 2 days before his death. In it, Richard wrote not about his new wife, but about his children. He expressed his sadness that William and Sarah could not accept his happiness with Elena. He wrote that he had changed his will not to spite them, but because he knew they were financially secure enough to stand on their own, while Elena had nothing and needed his protection. He also mentioned a recent, disturbing conversation with William, in which his son had angrily threatened to expose the truth about Elena, a truth Richard had already shared with him, hoping for understanding, but which had only fueled his son's rage. The journal was not proof of murder, but it was proof of motive, a powerful motive for a son who saw $8 million slipping through his fingers and who knew a dark secret about his father's wife that could be twisted into a weapon. Nina realized that the sedative in Richard's system was the key. It was a specific compound, hard to obtain. She traced it through a network of online pharmaceutical black markets and found a purchase made with a cryptocurrency wallet. Following the money was her specialty, and it led her, finally, to a computer in William Ashford's home office. William had tried to kill two birds with one stone, eliminate his father and frame the woman he hated. He had administered the drug himself during a private visit, then used Elena's accent to place the misleading call to the pharmacist. He was the beneficiary of his own crime. The confrontation was not dramatic, but methodical. Nina presented her evidence to the local district attorney, who obtained a warrant for William's arrest. He was taken from his investment firm in handcuffs, his cold demeanor finally crumbling into pale shock as the charges of first-degree murder and conspiracy were read to him. Sarah, horrified to learn the truth about her brother, cooperated fully with the prosecution. The case against William was solid: the digital trail of the sedative purchase, the testimony of a former associate he had foolishly confided in, and the damning journal entry that proved his rage. Elena Moreau, or Katia Novak, was cleared of all suspicion in her husband's death. However, the revelation of her true identity did lead to a separate investigation by immigration authorities. But Richard's careful legal work, combined with the sympathy generated by her story of survival and victimization, resulted in a settlement. She was allowed to remain in the country, stripped of her fraudulently obtained citizenship but granted a new legal status. She did not fight for the full inheritance. In a move that shocked everyone, Elena donated the mansion to a local historical society and established a charitable foundation in Richard's name with the remaining millions, an organization dedicated to helping war orphans and refugees. She kept only a modest annuity to live on, enough to be comfortable but not wealthy. She finally moved away from Havenport, disappearing from the society pages as quietly as she had arrived. William Ashford was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Sarah, now the sole heir to the diminished Ashford estate, eventually found peace, teaching art to underprivileged children in the foundation her father's true widow had created. The mansion on the cliff still stands, a silent monument to a love that was real, a secret that was deadly, and the ultimate price of greed. Elena Moreau, the woman with no past, finally built a future, not on a fortune, but on the memory of the only man who had ever made her feel safe. She was last seen boarding a train in Boston, heading west, a free woman at last, carrying nothing but a small suitcase and the name of a dead friend that had become her salvation.